What if I told you that 90% of all chronic diseases, diabetes, heart disease, dementia, stem from one single lie that you've been taught since childhood? A lie so deeply ingrained in medical schools, nutrition programs, and health guidelines that it has shaped how billions of people eat every single day. And the shocking part, this truth is actually destroying your body from the inside out. Think about it. If glucose or sugar was truly the body's preferred fuel, why does your body fight so hard to get it out of your bloodstream the moment you consume it? Why do we store almost endless amounts of fat enough to survive for months, but only a tiny, almost laughable amount of sugar? The answer flips everything you thought you knew about nutrition upside down. Welcome to the Nutrition Institute, where today we're going to pull back the curtain on this global deception and uncover why your health and maybe even your life depends on knowing the truth. Stick with me until the very end, because once you hear this, you'll never look at food the same way again. And don't forget, hit that subscribe button to support this channel so we can keep bringing you powerful, life-changing insights. I still remember the first time I heard this statement, 90% of chronic disease comes from one single lie. At first, I laughed. It sounded like one of those over the top health claims you see on the internet every day. But then I paused. The speaker wasn't talking about some obscure supplement or a fad diet. He was talking about something I had been taught to believe my entire life, that glucose or sugar is the body's preferred energy source. Think about how often you've heard that line. It's in textbooks, in lectures from doctors, in nutrition classes, plastered across food pyramids and dietary guidelines. I believed it without question, just like millions of other people. But here's the uncomfortable truth. Our own bodies don't actually behave as if glucose is our favorite fuel. In fact, the opposite is true. The more I thought about it, the more it hit me. If sugar is really the best fuel, then why does my body scramble to get rid of it every time I eat it? Why does my blood sugar spike, my pancreas rush to pump out insulin, and my cells push back when there's too much glucose? It's almost like my body is saying, this stuff is dangerous, get it out of here. From an evolutionary perspective, the argument becomes even more convincing. Imagine a caveman living tens of thousands of years ago. Did he have access to donuts, soda, or pasta? Of course not. Most of the time, he didn't even have steady access to fruits. What he had was fat stored on his own body and in the animals he hunted, and that fat kept him alive during periods when food was scarce. If we had depended on sugar as our main fuel, we never would have survived as a species. Here's a number that blew my mind. The average lean person carries about 100,000 calories of fat on their body. That's enough to fuel you for weeks, even months, without food. Meanwhile, the same person only carries about 1,700 calories of sugar stored as glycogen. That's barely enough for a single day of energy. If glucose were truly the preferred fuel, why would our bodies give us such a tiny reserve? Doesn't it make more sense that fat was always meant to be the long-term, reliable source of energy? And yet, every time we eat, especially when we load up on carbs, our bodies are forced into this chaotic balancing act. Blood sugar rises, insulin surges, and the excess sugar that doesn't get burned off is quickly converted into fat. At first glance, it seems harmless. Your body is just handling business. But what if this process isn't harmless at all? What if it's the very mechanism that sets the stage for almost every chronic disease we fear today? Diabetes, heart disease, dementia, and more. When I finally started to look deeper, I realized that glucose isn't this clean fuel source we were told it was. It's more like a short-term emergency backup system. Your body can use it when it needs a quick burst of energy, sure, but to build an entire diet around it, to tell people they should be getting 50, 60% of their calories from carbohydrates. That's not just misguided, it's dangerous. Let me put it another way. Imagine your bloodstream as a highway. Glucose is like shards of glass scattered all over the road. Every time the concentration of sugar rises, it's like pouring more of those sharp pieces onto the surface. Over time, the constant spikes scrape and damage the lining of your arteries. The body responds with inflammation, patching the damage as best as it can, but the wear and tear never stops. Eventually, that damage turns into the conditions we recognize: high blood pressure, clogged arteries, and an increased risk of heart attacks and strokes. The more I learned, the more it became obvious why so many of us struggle with weight gain, energy crashes, brain fog, and chronic illness. It's not that our bodies are broken, it's that we're forcing them to run on a fuel they were never designed to rely on long-term. It's like trying to run a diesel truck on gasoline. It sputters, breaks down, and eventually the engine fails. The most ironic part is that this doesn't just come from a misunderstanding of biology. It comes from decades of influence by the food industry. They benefit when we believe sugar is essential. Why? Because carbohydrates are cheap to produce, easy to process, and incredibly profitable to sell. Corn, wheat, rice, sugar, they can be turned into breakfast cereals, snack bars, cookies, bread, pasta, and 1,000 other products that fill supermarket shelves. And when science didn't support their claims, well, they funded the kind of research that did. That realization hit me hard. All my life, I thought the dietary guidelines were built purely on evidence and health. But now, I see how much of it was built on money, marketing, and politics. It's not that every doctor or nutritionist is lying to us on purpose. They're often just repeating what they were taught. But what they were taught is a system shaped by corporations, not by evolution or common sense. For me, this was the turning point. Once I saw the bigger picture, I couldn't unsee it. Suddenly, that simple statement, 90% of chronic disease comes from one lie, didn't sound like an exaggeration anymore. It sounded like the missing puzzle piece, and it left me with a choice. Do I keep eating the way I've always been told, loading up on carbs, believing that sugar is the fuel my body craves? Or do I take a step back, listen to what my body has been trying to tell me all along, and start feeding it the fuel it was actually designed to use? For me, the answer was clear. The question is, what will it be for you? There's something almost invisible happening inside the body when we eat sugar. And once you see it clearly, it's hard to ignore. It doesn't happen in one dramatic moment. It happens quietly, meal after meal, year after year. At first, you don't even notice it. You eat some bread, maybe a soda, a bowl of pasta, and your blood sugar rises. Your pancreas, that hardworking little gland behind your stomach, immediately jumps into action. It releases insulin like an emergency response team rushing in to pull that sugar out of the bloodstream before it does too much damage. For a while, everything looks fine. The system works, but here's the catch. This emergency routine isn't meant to be repeated several times a day, every day, for decades. Eventually, the cells get tired of the constant flood of glucose being pushed their way. They start to push back, whispering, enough is enough. This is what doctors call insulin resistance, but I think of it more like the body throwing up its hands in frustration, saying, stop, I can't take this anymore. Insulin resistance isn't some abstract medical concept. It's your body trying to protect itself. Imagine constantly overfilling a cup with water. At some point, the cup tips over, not because it's broken, but because it simply can't hold anymore. That's what your cells are doing when they resist insulin. They're protecting themselves from glucose overload, from what scientists sometimes call glucose toxicity. But the problem doesn't end there. When your cells resist insulin, your pancreas responds by pumping out even more of it, desperately trying to force the sugar into storage. The bloodstream becomes a battleground, glucose on one side, insulin on the other, and stuck in the middle is you with symptoms that creep in slowly, almost too subtle to connect at first. Maybe you notice you're getting up more often at night to use the bathroom, or maybe you feel tired even after a full night's sleep. Maybe your memory isn't as sharp as it used to be. Maybe you find yourself constantly craving snacks, never quite able to feel satisfied after a meal. These are the little warning signs that most of us brush off as just getting older or just being stressed. But in reality, they're red flags waving in front of us, pointing to a deeper problem, the slow march toward insulin resistance, and eventually chronic disease. Here's where it gets even scarier. If left unchecked for 10, 15, or 20 years, this cycle doesn't just stop at tiredness or cravings. It hardens into something far more serious: diabetes, heart disease, dementia. Doctors have even started calling Alzheimer's type 3 diabetes because of its strong connection to chronic blood sugar spikes. The same process that scratches and scars your arteries also damages the delicate blood vessels in your eyes, your kidneys, and your nervous system. That's why people with uncontrolled blood sugar often end up with vision problems, kidney failure, or nerve pain. The truth is, sugar doesn't just sweeten your coffee or give you a quick energy boost. Over time, it slowly carves away at the inside of your body, leaving behind a trail of damage that medicine often treats too late. What makes this so tragic is that the body gives us warning signs long before the worst happens. Those nightly bathroom trips, that brain fog, that stubborn belly fat that just won't go away. They're not random. They're not just aging. They're your body's way of shouting at you, begging you to change course before it's too late. When I learned this, it changed the way I looked at my own habits. For years, I thought those mid-afternoon crashes were just normal. I thought my cravings for carbs were just my weak willpower. But once I realized they were actually symptoms, early alarms of a much bigger problem, it hit me hard. This wasn't about discipline or age. It was about biology. My body wasn't broken. It was fighting to survive the constant assault of sugar. And here's the part that still amazes me. The solution is surprisingly simple. Studies have shown that by reducing carbohydrates to under 30 grams a day less than what's in a single bagel, people can dramatically improve their insulin sensitivity. In one study, nearly 90% of participants were able to stop taking insulin after just 10 weeks on a low-carb diet. Think about that. 10 weeks to reverse a problem that might have been building for decades. I know from my own experience how powerful this shift can be. When I cut back on carbs, the changes came faster than I expected. I didn't feel the constant need to snack. I didn't feel the foggy, drained afternoons. I could go from one meal to the next without feeling like I was starving. It was as if my body finally sighed in relief, no longer forced to burn sugar all the time, finally allowed to tap in to the massive stores of fat it had been carrying around all along. Of course, making this change isn't always easy. Sugar is addictive, and carbs are everywhere: bread at breakfast, sandwiches at lunch, pasta at dinner, snacks in between. And we've been conditioned to see them as harmless, even essential. But once you understand what's happening inside your body, once you connect those everyday symptoms to the deeper damage being done, it becomes harder to look at those foods the same way. For me, the hardest part wasn't giving up bread or sweets. The hardest part was accepting that I had been misled for so long, that the guidelines I trusted, the food pyramid I grew up with, were built on shaky ground. coming to terms with that betrayal, because that's what it feels like, was painful, but it was also liberating, because once I faced it, I could finally start making choices based on truth, not lies. Insulin resistance is not just a medical term. It's a wake-up call. It's your body's way of telling you to stop drowning it in sugar, to give it the chance to heal. And if you listen early enough, you don't just avoid disease, you get your energy back, your clarity back, your life back. So the next time you feel those cravings, that fatigue, that fog, pause for a moment. Ask yourself, is this just life? Or is it my body begging me to pay attention? The answer could change everything. When I first started questioning the idea that glucose was the body's preferred fuel, I assumed it was just a misunderstanding. Maybe scientists didn't have all the evidence decades ago. Maybe guidelines hadn't caught up with newer discoveries. That would have been the simple explanation. But as I dug deeper, I discovered something unsettling. This wasn't just bad science, it was intentional. It was business. The belief that we should base our diets around carbohydrates didn't spread naturally. It was engineered. It was taught in schools, embedded in government food pyramids, and echoed by doctors, not because it was the truth, but because it served powerful economic interests. Behind the curtain was the food industry, and they had everything to gain from convincing the world that carbs were essential. Think about the math. A single ton of corn can be purchased for less than $200. From that ton, food companies can produce thousands of boxes of cornflakes, gallons of corn syrup, or bags of chips. Each box or bottle is sold for many times its cost. The profit is staggering. But profit alone isn't enough. You need people hooked, consuming these products daily. That's where the lie comes in. By telling us glucose is the fuel our bodies love, the industry entered we'd crave and depend on foods that are cheap to make but expensive in terms of our health. And it worked. Generations of people, myself included, grew up believing that bread, pasta, and cereal should form the foundation of a healthy diet. We were told fat was dangerous, that butter and meat clogged arteries, while healthy grains would save us. Looking back, I can't help but feel a sense of betrayal, because while we obediently followed those guidelines, rates of obesity, diabetes, and heart disease exploded. The very illnesses those guidelines were supposed to prevent became more common than ever. But here's the hopeful part. Once you see through the lie, you can break free from it. Your body doesn't run on marketing slogans or political agendas. It runs on biology, and biology tells a very different story. When I shifted away from a carb-heavy diet, it wasn't easy. Carbohydrates had been my comfort food: bread in the morning, sandwiches at lunch, pasta at dinner. Cutting them back felt almost unnatural at first, like I was going against everything I'd been taught. But within weeks, the results were undeniable. My energy no longer crashed in the afternoon. I wasn't constantly thinking about my next snack. The brain fog I had chalked up to stress started to lift. It felt as though my body had been quietly waiting for me to give it permission to function the way it was designed to. That's when I learned about ketones. When you reduce carbohydrate intake, your body doesn't shut down, it adapts. It begins burning fat for fuel, producing ketones in the process. And ketones, it turns out, are a far cleaner and more efficient fuel, especially for the brain. The clarity I felt wasn't in my imagination. It was my brain thriving on the fuel it was meant to use. Evolution had prepared us for this all along. Fat was always the reliable energy reserve. Glucose was just the quick spark, the emergency backup. I know the objections. Some people say low-carb diets are extreme or unsustainable. But when I step back and look at the bigger picture, I realize what's truly extreme is the modern diet mountains of sugar and refined carbs at every meal, year after year. That's the real experiment. And the results are all around us: chronic disease, escalating healthcare costs, lives cut short. Breaking away from the old narrative requires courage. It means questioning not only what we eat, but why we believe what we believe. Why did I think cereal was a healthy breakfast? Why did I believe that fat was evil while sugar was harmless? The answer isn't that I was foolish, it's that I was conditioned. Conditioned by decades of marketing, reinforced by the very institutions I was supposed to trust. And here's the part that stays with me. None of this was inevitable. The rise in chronic disease wasn't destiny. It was manufactured. The same way companies manufacture snack foods, they manufactured consent. They taught us to believe in the lie so thoroughly that we lived it generation after generation. But the good news is that biology still wins in the end. No matter how much propaganda is thrown our way, the body never stops telling the truth. The moment you reduce the load of glucose, it responds, it heals, it begins burning fat, lowering inflammation, repairing damage. It doesn't take years. Sometimes you feel the difference in days. That's what gives me hope. Because if one lay could lead to so much disease, then one truth acknowledging fat and ketones as our real fuel has the power to lead us back to health. The choice is in our hands, not in the hands of the companies that profit from our ignorance. So, when I look to the future, I don't see an impossible uphill battle. I see a crossroads. On one side is the path we've been sold: more carbs, more medications, more decline. On the other side is a path that honors the wisdom of evolution and the honesty of the body: less sugar, more fat, and a return to the fuel we were designed to use. I've already chosen my path, and while it hasn't been perfect, it has been transformative. I feel sharper, stronger, freer, and that's why I keep asking myself, and now I ask you, if everything you were taught about fuel and health turned out to be a lie, would you keep following it anyway? Or would you dare to take a different path and see what your body is truly capable of? Looking back at everything we've explored, it's hard not to feel both frustrated and hopeful at the same time. Frustrated because for decades, we've been told to trust a story about nutrition that turned out to be backwards. We were taught that glucose, the very fuel our bodies fight to control, is somehow the preferred energy source. And hopeful because the truth is finally being uncovered, and with it, the possibility of change. For me, the most powerful lesson is that our bodies are not broken. They are not betraying us with disease or weakness. They are doing exactly what they were designed to do: sending signals, raising alarms, and trying to protect us from harm. Insulin resistance, weight gain, fatigue, even brain fog, these aren't failures. They are messages. And once we start listening, everything shifts. The takeaway is simple, but not easy. We must question what we've been told. Just because something is repeated in textbooks or endorsed by institutions doesn't make it true. The food industry has mastered the art of shaping our beliefs to align with their profits, not our health. And the sooner we recognize that, the sooner we can take back control of our choices. For me personally, adopting a low-carb lifestyle wasn't just about losing weight or avoiding diabetes. It was about reclaiming clarity, mental, emotional, and physical. It was about discovering that I didn't have to be a slave to cravings, that I could go through a day without crashing in the afternoon, that I could trust my body again. That sense of empowerment is something no guideline, no food pyramid, no industry slogan could ever give me. But here's the part I don't want you to miss. This isn't just about me. It's about all of us. Imagine if more people understood the truth about fuel and health. Imagine if instead of managing disease, we prevented it. Imagine if we didn't wait until insulin resistance hardened into diabetes, or until brain fog turned into dementia. Before we acted, that vision isn't a fantasy. It's possible, but it requires courage, the courage to step away from the familiar path and try something different. So the question I want to leave you with is simple. Do you believe your body was truly designed to thrive on sugar? Or do you believe it deserves a better fuel? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Drop a comment below and share your perspective. It could inspire someone else who's on the same journey. And if this conversation has opened your eyes or given you something valuable to think about, please consider subscribing to the Nutrition Institute. Your support gives us the motivation to keep creating powerful life-changing content that challenges the lies and uncovers the truth about health. The choice is yours, and the future of your health starts now.